On his 18th birthday, he was handed a single, rusted key and told he was on his own. What he found locked away in a worthless, forgotten cellar wasn't just his father's legacy, it was a second chance he never knew he had. If that feeling of being at the edge of something terrifying and new sounds familiar, stick with me. And maybe hit that subscribe button, because we talk about the hard things here, the things that change you. The key was cold. Colder than the marble countertop it landed on with a flat, final little clink. It was the sound of a door closing forever. My stepmother, Linda, didn't slide it across the counter. She didn't place it in my hand. She dropped it from a height of about 6 inches, a gesture of casual dismissal that said everything she hadn't bothered to say for the past 2 years. "Happy birthday, Alex," she said, her voice as sterile as the all-white kitchen she'd had installed the month after Dad's funeral. "Your father left you the old property. It's all in your name now. The house is condemned, but the cellar is supposedly sound. That's yours." She picked up her car keys from the hook by the door, the little designer charms jingling. It was the sound of her freedom. "There's a bus ticket on the table. It leaves in an hour." I just stood there, staring at the key. It was long and skeletal, the kind you see in old movies. The kind that opens chests or dungeons. It didn't look like it belonged in this world of stainless steel and recessed lighting. It belonged to my father's world. A world of dirt under the fingernails, of worn-out flannel shirts that smelled of sawdust and rain. A world that had been systematically erased from this house. His favorite armchair was gone. His collection of old vinyl records, gone. His muddy boots, which used to sit by the back door, had been the first things to disappear. Now it was my turn. I was the last piece of him left in her house, and my time was up. 18, the magic number that turned a grieving kid into a legal inconvenience. I didn't say anything. What was there to say? I'd seen this coming. For 2 years, I had lived in a state of suspended animation, a ghost in the hallways of my own home. Linda had been polite, in the way a museum curator is polite around an exhibit they wish would just go into storage. She fed me, she clothed me, she made sure my school forms were signed. But she never looked at me. Not really. She looked through me, at the wall behind me, at the future she was planning that didn't have a 6-foot-tall echo of her late husband in it. The silence in the house had been a countdown timer. Today, it hit 0. I picked up the key. The rust felt like grit under my thumb. "The cellar?" I finally managed, my voice cracking slightly. "That's it?" She paused with her hand on the doorknob, turning back with an expression that was almost pity, but not quite. It was more like impatience wearing a mask of sympathy. "Alex, your father. He didn't have anything. His illness took everything. The medical bills, the bad investments. This house was mortgaged to the hilt. I'm barely keeping my head above water." She gestured around the pristine kitchen, at the $1,000 espresso machine, the wine fridge humming quietly to itself. "This property, the one out in Redwater, it's worthless. The land is sour. The house is a teardown. He was sentimental about it, that's all. He wanted you to have something of his, I suppose. A memory." A memory. The word hung in the air, thin and useless. I had plenty of memories. I had the memory of his hand on my shoulder, steady and warm. The memory of his laugh, a deep rumble that could shake the dust from the rafters. I didn't need a derelict cellar to remember him. What I needed was a home. What I needed was a future that hadn't just been yanked out from under me. I looked at the bus ticket next to a bowl of perfect, plastic-looking apples. One way. To a town I hadn't seen since I was 10 years old. A place that existed in my mind as a series of faded photographs. A tire swing. A porch with peeling paint. A sky so big it hurt your eyes. "There are some boxes in your room," she added, her tone softening just enough to be cruel. "Things of yours. The driver will take them. I've already arranged it." It wasn't an offer. It was a logistical statement. My entire life, condensed into a few cardboard boxes. I nodded, a slow, numb dip of my chin. The fight had gone out of me a long time ago. Maybe it had gone out of me the day I watched my father take his last, shallow breath in a hospital bed that smelled of bleach and fear. He'd squeezed my hand, his eyes trying to tell me something, but the words wouldn't come. He just looked at me, his gaze full of a desperate, silent apology. I didn't understand it then. I thought he was sorry for leaving me. Now, standing in this cold white kitchen, I was beginning to think he was sorry for where he was leaving me. Linda opened the door. The crisp autumn air rushed in, carrying the scent of cut grass from a neighbor's lawn. It smelled like a world that was moving on without me. "Good luck, Alex," she said, and then she was gone. The door clicked shut, and the deadbolt slid into place with a heavy, metallic thud. I was alone. Just me and the key and the one-way ticket to a memory. I stood there for a long time, listening to the hum of the refrigerator. The silence was different now. It wasn't a countdown anymore. It was just empty. An absence. I closed my hand around the key, the sharp edges digging into my palm. It was the only thing I had left of him. A key to a worthless cellar. My inheritance. The bus ride was a 4-hour blur of gray highway and skeletal trees clawing at a washed-out sky. I sat with my forehead pressed against the cold glass, watching the suburbs bleed into strip malls, then into farmland, then into nothing. My life was in 3 cardboard boxes in the luggage compartment below. Clothes, a few books, a framed photo of me and Dad at a baseball game, and my laptop. It felt impossibly light. It felt like nothing. Linda's words echoed in my head. He didn't have anything. It was a verdict, delivered with the casual certainty of someone who measured a man's life by the numbers on a bank statement. And maybe she was right. The last few years had been hard. I knew money was tight. I heard the hushed, tense phone calls Dad would have with insurance companies, his voice getting tighter and tighter until he would hang up and just sit in the dark, rubbing his temples. He sold his truck. He stopped going on his annual fishing trip with his buddies. He started looking smaller, caved in. I thought it was just the illness. But Linda made it sound like something else, like failure. The bus wheezed to a stop at a gas station with a single, flickering sign that said, Redwater. This was it. The driver, a large man with a kind, tired face, hauled my boxes out and set them on the gravel shoulder. "This is you, son," he said, wiping his hands on his pants. "You sure this is the place?" I looked around. There was the gas station, a boarded-up diner across the street, and a long, empty road stretching into the woods. It looked like the kind of town people left, not the kind they arrived in. "Yeah," I said, my voice sounding thin in the open air. "This is it." He gave me a doubtful look, then shrugged and climbed back onto the bus. I watched it pull away, its red taillights shrinking until they were just pinpricks, and then they were gone. The silence that descended was profound. It was a living thing, made of the rustle of dry leaves and the distant caw of a crow. I was completely and utterly alone. My phone had no signal. Of course it didn't. I looked at the address scrawled on the back of the ticket envelope. Black Creek Road. I remembered the name. I asked the man inside the gas station, a wiry old fellow who looked like he'd been carved from driftwood. He pointed a trembling finger down the empty road. "About 2 miles that way. Can't miss it. The old Miller place. Ain't nobody lived out there in years." The old Miller place. That was us. That was my father's family name. The 2-mile walk felt like 20. I dragged my boxes one at a time, leapfrogging them down the crumbling asphalt shoulder. The air grew colder as the sun began to dip below the tree line, painting the clouds in bruised shades of purple and orange. And then I saw it. Set back from the road, almost swallowed by overgrown woods, was a house, or what was left of one. Linda wasn't exaggerating. It was a skeleton. The roof sagged in the middle like a broken back. The windows were dark, vacant eyes, most of them shattered. The porch tilted at a drunken angle, and the white paint had peeled away to reveal the gray, weathered wood beneath. It looked haunted, not by ghosts, but by neglect, by time. My heart sank. This was my inheritance? A ruin, a monument to decay. I pushed my way through a thicket of weeds that had once been a front yard and stood before the house. There was a strange beauty to it, the way nature was reclaiming it, ivy snaking up the columns and moss carpeting the porch steps. But it was the beauty of a shipwreck. I walked around the side, looking for the cellar. I found it at the back of the house, a pair of wide, diagonal doors set into the earth, secured by a heavy, rusted hasp and a massive, ancient-looking padlock. This had to be it. This was what the key was for. My hands were shaking as I pulled the key from my pocket. It felt colder now, heavier. I slid it into the padlock. For a second, it wouldn't turn. It was frozen with rust and disuse. I put my shoulder into it, gritting my teeth, and forced it. There was a horrible, grinding screech, a protest of metal on metal, and then a loud clack. The lock sprang open. I pulled the heavy padlock off and let it fall into the weeds. It took all my strength to lift the first door. It groaned on its hinges, sending a shower of rust and dead leaves down into the darkness below. A wave of cool, musty air washed over me. It smelled of damp earth, of stone, of things long forgotten. It smelled like a tomb. I propped the door open with a fallen branch and then lifted the other. A set of steep, stone steps led down into blackness. I hesitated. Every instinct told me to turn around, to walk back to that gas station and just keep going. But where would I go? This was it. This was all I had. A key, a couple of boxes, and a hole in the ground. Taking a deep breath, I pulled out my phone and turned on the flashlight. The beam cut a weak, trembling circle into the oppressive dark. I took the first step down. The stone was slick with moisture. The air grew colder, heavier with each step. At the bottom, I stood on a packed dirt floor. My light swept across the space. It was bigger than I expected. The walls were made of massive, rough-hewn stones, fitted together with surprising precision. The ceiling was low, supported by thick wooden beams that looked as old as the hills. It was empty, mostly. A few rotting wooden shelves lined one wall, holding nothing but cobwebs and dust. A pile of decaying burlap sacks slumped in a corner. It was just a cellar. A damp, empty, worthless cellar. Disappointment washed over me, so sharp and bitter it felt like a physical blow. Linda was right. My father had left me nothing. A joke. A cruel, sentimental gesture that had led me to a hole in the ground in the middle of nowhere. I kicked at a loose stone on the floor, anger flaring in my chest. Anger at him for leaving me with this. Anger at Linda for being so smugly correct. Anger at myself for holding on to some stupid, childish sliver of hope that there would be something more. As my light beam danced around the room in my frustration, it caught on something. A line. A faint, straight line on the back wall. It was too perfect, too deliberate to be a natural crack in the stone. My curiosity peaked, overriding my anger. I walked closer, running my fingers along the wall. The stones were cold and damp, but this section felt different. I pushed. Nothing. I ran my light along the line. It formed a perfect rectangle, about the size of a door, but there was no handle, no hinges. It was seamless. I started tapping on the stones inside the rectangle. They sounded solid. But then, near the bottom, one of them gave a hollow thud. 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 Different from the others. I pressed my fingers into the mortar around it. It was looser here, crumbling. I dug at it with my fingernails, then with the edge of the old key. Chunks of dried mortar fell away, revealing a dark gap. I worked faster, my heart starting to pound in my chest. I pulled and wiggled the stone, and finally, with a scraping groan, it came loose. I dropped the stone and shone my light into the hole. It wasn't deep. My beam reflected off something metal. A handle. A small, iron ring bolt, set flush into the surface of whatever was behind the wall. My breath caught in my throat. This wasn't just a wall. It was a door. A hidden door. I reached into the hole, my fingers closing around the cold iron ring. I pulled. It was incredibly heavy. It didn't swing, it slid. With a deep, grinding rumble that vibrated through the floor, the entire section of stone wall began to recede into the darkness behind it. It moved only a few inches, then stopped. I pulled again, using my whole body, my feet slipping on the dirt floor. It moved another few inches. There was a gap now, wide enough to slip through. A different kind of air flowed out of the gap. It was still cool, but it was dry. It didn't have the smell of damp and decay. It smelled of old wood, of paper, of something else. Something clean and metallic. I squeezed through the opening, my heart hammering against my ribs. I was in another room, a smaller chamber, perfectly square. It was completely lined with thick, dark wood planks, like the inside of a ship's cabin. And in the center of the room, sitting on a low wooden pedestal, was a military-style footlocker. It was olive drab, with heavy-duty latches on the front. On the top, stenciled in faded white paint, was one word: Miller. My father's name. My name. I knelt before it, feeling like an archaeologist discovering a pharaoh's tomb. This was it. This was what he had hidden. This was the real inheritance. The latches weren't locked. My hands trembled as I flipped them open. They made a satisfying, solid thunk. I lifted the lid. The first thing I saw was money, bundles of it. Not stacks of crisp, new bills from a bank, but worn, circulated cash. 50s and hundreds, held together with simple rubber bands. There must have been thousands of dollars, tens of thousands. I stared at it, my mind struggling to process what I was seeing. Linda had said he had nothing, that the illness took everything. But this was not nothing. This was a fortune. At least, it was to me. But underneath the money, there was something else. A thick, leather-bound journal and a stack of envelopes tied together with a piece of twine. The envelopes were addressed to me. Alex. In my father's familiar, slightly messy handwriting. I pushed the bundles of cash aside. The money suddenly seemed unimportant. I picked up the top envelope. It felt heavy, substantial. I carefully untied the twine. The first letter had a date on it, written in the top corner. It was from 2 years ago. The week after his final diagnosis. The week he started to get quiet. The week he started to disappear. I opened the letter. The paper was thick, creamy. I began to read. My dearest Alex, it began. If you are reading this, then it means I'm gone. And it means Linda has done what I knew she would. I'm sorry. I am so sorry for that. I want you to know that leaving you in that house with her was the hardest thing I've ever had to do. But I had no choice. Please, before you judge me, read all of this. Understand that everything I did in my last 2 years, every cold shoulder, every short answer, every moment I seemed distant, it was all to protect this. To protect you. I had to stop reading. My eyes were burning. I could hear his voice in the words, that low, gentle rumble. I could feel the weight of his apology, an apology I never knew I was owed. I took a shaky breath and continued reading. He explained everything. The diagnosis was worse than he'd let on. He knew he didn't have much time. He also knew his health insurance was a joke, and that the treatments would drain every penny they had. He knew Linda, who had come into his life after my mom died, loved the comfort his contractor's income provided, but he wasn't sure how deep her love for him, or for me, truly ran. He suspected it was as shallow as her taste in furniture. So he made a plan, a desperate, secret plan. He started taking on side jobs, cash only, small repairs, under-the-table construction gigs. He worked himself to the bone, even as the illness was eating away at him. He told Linda the money was going to experimental treatments, to specialists that didn't exist. In reality, he was stashing it. Every dollar he could spare, he drove out here, to the old family property, and sealed it away in this hidden room he had built as a young man with his own father. This cellar, this land, was the one thing that was in his name alone, inherited from his parents, untouchable by her. He was building a lifeboat for me, while pretending he was sinking the ship. I had to make her believe I was broke, he wrote. I had to make her believe this place was worthless. It was the only way she would let it go. The only way she would give it to you, thinking she was getting rid of a piece of useless trash and the last reminder of a husband who left her with nothing. It was a performance, son. A long, painful performance. And the hardest part was, I had to push you away too. If you and I were too close, if she saw how much I adored you, she might have seen you as a threat. She might have fought for this place out of spite. So I became distant. I became quiet. I let you think I was just a sick, tired old man who couldn't connect anymore. It broke my heart every single day. I hope, I pray, that one day you'll forgive me for that. I wasn't just crying now, I was sobbing. Deep, ragged breaths that tore at my chest. I fell back against the wooden wall of the secret room, the letter clutched in my hand. It was all a lie. The last 2 years of coldness, the distance, the feeling that I was losing him long before he was actually gone. It wasn't real. It was a shield. It was protection. It was the most painful, most profound act of love I could possibly imagine. He hadn't abandoned me. He had been saving me, in the only way he knew how. I cried for the father I thought I had lost twice. Once to illness, and once to his own emotional retreat. And I cried with the relief of finding him again, right here, in the pages of this letter. After a long time, my tears subsided into a hollow ache in my chest. I wiped my face on my sleeve and picked up the next letter. There were a dozen of them, each one dated a few months after the last. They were a chronicle of his last years, a secret conversation he'd been having with his future, orphan son. He told me stories about his own childhood in this house, about my grandfather, about the things he wished he had taught me. He gave me advice about life, about women, about being a good man. It was everything he hadn't been able to say out loud. It was a father's love distilled onto paper. The last letter was different. The handwriting was shakier, the lines wavering. It was dated just 3 days before he died. Alex, it read, time is short now. There's one more thing you need to know. The money will help you get on your feet. It's a start. But the real inheritance isn't the cash. It's the land itself. You remember Mr. Henderson, the old lawyer in town. His office is on Main Street. Go see him. He has a package for you. It contains geological surveys and some documents my father filed with the county 50 years ago. Don't talk to anyone else about it first. Especially not some slick developer in a suit. People have been trying to buy this land for years. I always said no. They think it's for a new housing tract. They're wrong. He went on to explain. My grandfather, a man I'd never met, had been a bit of a geology nut. He'd discovered something on this property. A significant deposit of high-purity quartz, the kind used in manufacturing semiconductors and electronics. Back then, it was a geological curiosity. But now, it was incredibly valuable. My grandfather had legally registered the mineral rights, separate from the land title, and they had passed to my father.
and now to me. The developers sniffing around knew. They'd done their own quiet surveys. Their lowball offers for the worthless land were a predatory attempt to steal a fortune from a family they assumed was ignorant. "They will come to you, son," he wrote. "They'll offer you what sounds like a lot of money for a rundown piece of land. They will lie to you. They will tell you it's a generous offer. Don't sell. Don't you dare sell. This isn't about the money. It's about our legacy."
This land is special. Your grandfather believed it, and I believe it. What you do with it is up to you. Build something. Protect it. Use it to make a life for yourself. A real life. Be the man I know you are. I love you more than words can say. I'll be watching over you. Always. Love, Dad. I folded the letter and placed it carefully back in the envelope. The air in the little room was thick with the weight of it all. I looked at the money, at the journal, at the letters. This wasn't just an inheritance. It was a mission, a roadmap, a final gift from a man who had seen the storm coming and had built his son an ark. I felt a surge of something I hadn't felt in 2 years: purpose. The grief was still there, a heavy stone in my gut. But now, it was surrounded by something else. A fierce, burning determination. Linda thought she had kicked me out with nothing. The developers thought they could swindle a grieving kid. They were all wrong. They had underestimated me. But more importantly, they had underestimated my father. The first thing I did was count the money. It took me almost an hour. It came to just over $87,000. It felt like $1 billion. It was seed money. It was a war chest. It was enough. I carefully packed everything back into the footlocker, except for one bundle of cash, which I stuffed into my jacket pocket. I slid the heavy stone door back into place, the grinding sound echoing in the silence. I replaced the loose stone, packing the dirt and mortar around it as best I could. It wasn't perfect, but in the dark, no one would ever notice it. I climbed the steps out of the cellar, my legs feeling steadier than they had in years. The sun had set, and the sky was a deep indigo, salted with stars. The air was cold and clean. I looked at the ruined house, but I didn't see a ruin anymore. I saw a project. I saw a home. My home. The next morning, I walked back into town. The 2 miles didn't feel so long this time. Redwater looked different in the daylight. It was still sleepy and a little worn down, but it had a quiet dignity. Old brick buildings with faded advertisements painted on their sides, a town square with a gazebo, a small grocery store with a bell that jingled when you opened the door. It felt real, in a way the sterile suburbs I'd just left never had. I found Henderson Law Office on Main Street. It was a small, unassuming storefront with gold lettering peeling on the glass. I hesitated for a moment, my hand on the doorknob. This was it. This was the next step my father had laid out for me. I walked in. A woman with a kind face and a graying bun looked up from a large wooden desk. "Can I help you?" she asked. "I'm here to see Mr. Henderson," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "My name is Alex Miller." Her eyes widened slightly. "Miller," she repeated softly. "Of course. Your father said you might be stopping by. Please, have a seat. I'll let him know you're here." A few minutes later, a man who looked to be in his late 60s emerged from a back office. He was tall and a bit stooped, with a shock of white hair and sharp, intelligent eyes behind a pair of wire-rimmed glasses. He wore a rumpled tweed jacket that smelled faintly of pipe tobacco. He looked at me, a sad, knowing smile on his face. "Alex, I'll be damned. You have your father's eyes," he said, extending a hand. His grip was firm. "I'm Arthur Henderson. Your dad and I went to school together. I was so sorry to hear about his passing. He was a good man." He led me back to his office, which was cluttered with towering stacks of books and legal files. It was a comfortable,
lived in chaos.
He gestured for me to sit in a worn leather armchair. "Your father dropped something off for you a few weeks before the end," he said, his voice gentle. "He made me promise I would only give it to you, and only after you came asking for it yourself." He pulled a thick, sealed manila envelope from a drawer in his desk and slid it across to me. "He also left me a letter of instruction. He told me everything, Alex. About his plan, about Linda, about the land." I looked down at the envelope. It felt impossibly heavy. "He said you would know what to do," Mr. Henderson continued, watching me closely. "He also said you might need a lawyer. If you do, my services are at your disposal. Pro bono, of course. For Tom." I spent the next 2 hours in his office. I told him everything. About being kicked out, about the key, about the hidden room and the letters and the money. I didn't have to. His expression told me he already knew most of it, but he let me talk, listening patiently, nodding in all the right places. When I finished, he was silent for a long moment, looking out the window at the quiet street. "Tom Miller," he finally said, shaking his head with a small, sad smile. "That man could be as stubborn as a mule and twice as clever. He played the long game. He played it for you." Then he leaned forward, his expression turning serious. "Now about this envelope. It contains the original mineral rights claim your grandfather filed in 1958, the official county surveys, and an independent geological appraisal your father commissioned last year. According to this, the quartz deposit on your land is one of the richest veins discovered in this state in the last 50 years. Conservatively, it's worth millions." Millions. The word didn't even seem real. It was a number so large it had no meaning. I just stared at him, my mind blank. "The developer, a company called Stone Ridge Properties, they know," he went on, his voice hard. "They've been trying to get that land for a decade. They offered your father a pittance for it 6 months ago, $200,000. He told them to go to hell." He tapped a folder on his desk. "And right on cue, an offer letter arrived for you this morning. They must have been tracking the property transfer. They sent it here, assuming you'd have to deal with the estate through a local lawyer." He pushed the letter across the desk. It was from Stone Ridge Properties, addressed to me. The offer was for $250,000. They called it a generous final offer to help a young man in a difficult situation. It was vulture capitalism at its finest. "They think you're a broke, grieving 18-year-old kid who will see that number and think all his prayers have been answered," Mr. Henderson said, his eyes flashing with anger. "They're counting on you being desperate and uninformed." I looked from the offer letter to the thick envelope from my father. My choice was laid out right there on the polished wood of the desk. The easy way or the right way? The path of least resistance or the one my father had sacrificed everything to put me on? It wasn't even a choice. "What do we do?" I asked, my voice clear and steady. Mr. Henderson leaned back in his chair, a slow, genuine smile spreading across his face. "Now that," he said, "is the question I was hoping you'd ask. First, we send them a reply. A very, very short one." The next few weeks were a whirlwind. With Mr. Henderson guiding me, I started to take control. We sent a registered letter to Stone Ridge Properties politely declining their offer and informing them that we were fully aware of the land's mineral value and that any future correspondence should go through my legal counsel. The silence that followed was deafening and, as Mr. Henderson put it, deliciously telling. While we waited for their next move, I put the money my father had left me to work. I rented a small, furnished apartment above the grocery store in town. It was modest, but it was mine. I bought a used pickup truck, some tools, and work clothes, and every day I drove out to the property. I started with the grounds. I bought a scythe and a brush axe and began the monumental task of clearing the overgrown yard. It was back-breaking work. I hacked through thorny brambles, pulled up weeds that were as thick as my arm, and cut down the saplings that were trying to turn the lawn back into a forest. With every swing of the scythe, I felt like I was clearing away not just the neglect from the land, but the fog from my own mind. The physical exhaustion was cleansing. It left no room for self-pity. At night, I would collapse into bed, my muscles screaming, but my mind was quiet and clear. The locals started to notice. The man at the gas station would give me a nod as I filled up my truck. The woman who ran the grocery store started calling me by name, slipping an extra apple into my bag. An old farmer down the road stopped by one afternoon while I was wrestling with a particularly stubborn tree stump. He didn't say much. He just got out of his truck, grabbed a chain from the back, and helped me pull the stump out with his tractor. "Your dad was a good man," he said, before tipping his hat and driving off. "Good to see a miller back on this land." I was becoming part of the town, in a way I had never been a part of the pristine suburb where I'd grown up. I was the miller boy, the one fixing up the old place. I belonged. One day, a sleek black SUV I didn't recognize pulled up at the end of my driveway. A man in an expensive suit got out. He was exactly as my father had described him, slick, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He introduced himself as Mark Renshaw from Stone Ridge Properties. "Just wanted to stop by and introduce myself in person, Alex," he said, looking around at the cleared yard and the dilapidated house with a practiced air of disdain. "We were sorry to hear your father passed. We had a great deal of respect for him." The lie was so bald-faced it was almost funny. "We think our offer was very fair," he continued, getting to the point. "It could set you up for life. College, a new car, a fresh start somewhere. Better." He gestured vaguely, as if to encompass the entire concept of a world outside of Redwater. "This place, it's a money pit. You'll pour everything you have into it and have nothing to show for it." I just leaned on my shovel, covered in dirt and sweat, and looked at him. I thought about my father, working himself into an early grave to give me this choice. I thought about his letters, about the love and sacrifice packed into that hidden room. I thought about the quiet dignity of the people in this town. "The offer was not fair," I said, my voice even. "And I'm not interested in selling. Not to you." His smile tightened. The mask slipped for just a second. "You're making a mistake, kid," he said, his voice losing its friendly veneer. "You're in over your head. We can make this easy, or we can make it very, very difficult." It was a threat, plain and simple. He was used to getting his way, but he didn't know who he was dealing with. He didn't know about the letters, or the money, or Mr. Henderson. He just saw a kid with a shovel. "I guess it's going to be difficult then," I said. He stared at me for a long moment, then shook his head, got back in his expensive SUV, and drove away, kicking up a cloud of dust. I knew it wasn't over. It was just the beginning. The next day, I received a notice of legal action. Stonebridge was suing me, claiming an old, vaguely worded clause in a 100-year-old deed gave them a right of first refusal on any mineral extraction. It was a bluff, a tactic of intimidation designed to bankrupt me with legal fees. Mr. Henderson just laughed when I showed it to him. "Let them," he said, rubbing his hands together with glee. "I haven't had this much fun in years." The legal battle was long and ugly. They tried to bury us in paperwork, in motions and delays, but they had made a critical miscalculation. They assumed I was alone. I wasn't. Mr. Henderson was a brilliant, cagey lawyer who knew county law better than they ever could. And the town rallied around me. Stories started to circulate about the big city corporation trying to bully the Miller boy out of his family land. The farmer who had helped with the stump showed up with two of his sons one Saturday, and we spent the day reinforcing the foundation of the old house. The owner of the diner started sending over free meals. They saw it as their fight too. A fight against the kind of predatory outsiders who saw their home as nothing more than a resource to be plundered. During the discovery phase of the lawsuit, we turned over my father's geological survey. In return, we got theirs. And we found something interesting. Their survey was far more detailed than they had let on. They knew the exact location, depth, and quality of the quartz vein. They also knew something else. The vein ran partially under the neighboring property, the old farm belonging to the man who had helped me with the stump. They had been planning to acquire my land, extract the quartz, and then use that position to force my neighbor to sell his land for a fraction of its worth. Their plan wasn't just to swindle me, it was to swindle the whole community. When we presented that evidence, their case crumbled. Faced with a lawsuit from me and a potential class action from other local landowners, Stone Ridge Properties folded. They withdrew their suit and issued a formal public apology. Their slick representative, Mr. Renshaw, was fired. We had won. A few weeks later, I got a call from a different kind of company. A tech firm from California that specialized in sustainable and ethical sourcing of materials. They had heard about the lawsuit and the high-grade quartz deposit. They weren't interested in strip mining the land. They wanted to propose a partnership, a small-scale, environmentally low-impact mining operation that would bring jobs to the area, with a profit-sharing agreement that would benefit the entire community of Redwater. They offered me a price for the mineral rights that was 10 times what Stone Ridge had tried to lowball me with, plus a permanent seat on the board of the new local subsidiary. I took the deal. The money was life-changing, of course. It was more than I could ever have imagined. But my father's final letter echoed in my head. This isn't about the money. It's about our legacy. The real victory wasn't the number in my bank account. It was the jobs coming to town. It was the preservation of the land. It was the look on my neighbor's face when I told him the partnership included buying his mineral rights at the same premium price. It was about using what my father left me, not just to build a life for myself, but to lift up the community that had embraced me when I had nothing. I never did tear down the old house. I spent the next year restoring it. I used the best materials, hired local craftsmen to help me. I rebuilt the sagging roof, replaced the broken windows, and sanded the old floors until they shone. I turned it from a ruin into a home. My home. It's where I'm sitting right now, in a replica of the old armchair my father used to love, looking out the window at a yard that is no longer a tangle of weeds, but a garden. The cellar is still there. I've cleaned it up, installed proper lighting, but the hidden room remains untouched. It's a shrine. Sometimes, on quiet nights, I go down there and I read my father's letters again. I remind myself of where I came from and of the man who gave me everything by pretending he had nothing. Linda sent me a letter once, after the news of the settlement became public. It was full of fake sentimentality and a not-so-subtle suggestion that she, as my father's widow, was entitled to a share. Mr. Henderson helped me draft the reply. It was very polite and very, very short. I never heard from her again. My inheritance wasn't a worthless cellar. It was a test. It was a chance to become the man my father always knew I could be. He didn't just leave me money and land. He left me a purpose. He left me a community. He left me a home. And that's a kind of wealth that no one can ever put a price on. This journey, from that cold kitchen to this warm house, it taught me that what we inherit is so much more than what's written in a will. It's the strength, the love, the sacrifices that are made for us in secret. It's the legacy we choose to build from the pieces we're given. If this story has resonated with you, If you've ever felt lost and then found your way back to something that truly matters, I'd love to hear about it in the comments. I read them all because every story of resilience is a light in the dark. Thank you for being here, for listening. If you believe in second chances and the power of a legacy that goes beyond money, I hope you'll subscribe and become a part of this community we're building here. Because we all have a story to tell. We just need to be brave enough to live it.